welcome to Daryl's Beekeeping Videos. I'm a master beekeeper, and today's lesson is what equipment do new beekeepers need? This is a class I typically teach during bee schools, and it's generally allotted for about an hour. Hopefully I'll get through it a little faster with you today. But during the video, I'll be referencing some of my notes, and as I always do whenever I use my notes, I will include these notes at the very end of the video so you can read them individually. If you miss a piece that I talk about, or if you can't quite understand me, these will be at the very end. All right, so when it comes down to what you need to have for your first year of beekeeping, basically it's going to come down to a few different categories. In today's agenda, I'm going to talk about, first of all, you do not need to buy everything at once. And second of all, don't buy a single piece of equipment until you talk to a mentor. In this case, you're watching my video, that will point you in the right direction as well. Again, based on my years of experience as well as other beekeepers' experience. So this is generally what we consider advising people to get for their first year of beekeeping. Next thing we're going to talk about is what books to start off with. And then I'll talk about should you get new or used equipment. And then we'll talk about some protective equipment that you're going to need. And then I'm going to talk about some basic tools that you'll need to work with the bees. And then I'm going to talk about the hive components, and I will actually show you what my typical hive component setup is out in my apiary. And then we'll talk about the different ways that you can get the bees. All right, so the first thing is, as I stated, you do not need to buy everything all at once. You can get the bare basic stuff you need to start off with, and then expand your equipment list and acquiring new equipment as you determine what you actually need. Again, I would not recommend buying anything unless you talk to a mentor first, so that you don't end up like I did my very first year. I didn't have a mentor, and I bought a lot of stuff that I probably will never use. For example, I bought a pollen trap, and then it's $100 back in the day. It was a $100 piece of gear. I went around, told all my neighbors, hey, I'm going to collect pollen and sell it. So please don't use pesticides that are harmful for the honeybees. And I had one farmer that lives about 2 miles from me, which is well within foraging range of the honeybees, says, hey, that's great, you're a beekeeper, but I'm still going to use my pesticides. I'm not paying for the more expensive pesticides that aren't honeybee friendly, that are more honeybee friendly. So no, I'm not going to do it. So that piece of gear, that $100 piece of gear, is now a teaching aid that I will never use for pollen trapping. So again, before you consider buying anything, talk to a mentor. I'll give you some good pointers during this presentation on what's good to have, what's optional to have, some things that can wait. All right, so books. So again, beekeeping is all about knowledge and experience. So if you're on a budget, there are a few good books that we recommend. First is First Lessons, and I'll have still photo these in the final version if I remember to do it. First lesson, the cheapest book you can get is First Lessons in Beekeeping by Dr. Delaplane. It's about a $12 book the last time I looked. The next step up is Beekeeping for Dummies. Get the most current edition that's out there. I think it's the 5th edition is the most current one out there. But again, get the most current edition. You can easily get it on Amazon for about $25. The next step up, and which is the very best book to get, is The Hive and the Honeybee. This is considered the beekeeping Bible in the beekeeping industry because it covers everything from anatomy and physiology to history to the different equipment. It's a very good book, and if you're ever going through the Master Beekeeping Program, which I highly encourage you to start going through that, and I've got videos on going through the Master Beekeeping Program, they get a lot of their questions from this book. It's an excellent book. Beekeeping is both a science and an art. The science of beekeeping is knowing what the cause and effect of something. For example, if I see deformed wings, that's caused by a varroa mite, and I know the effect is if I don't treat it, it can lead to demise of my colony. And the art of beekeeping is knowing which management techniques to apply against that. So these books that I just referenced will help you start along that journey. So again, very good books to start off with. And I've got other videos on skills that you'll need for your first year. I encourage you to watch that video. It's a lengthy video, but again, it will help you out. So as well as second and third year and fourth year skills that will help you out as well. So again, start off with books, start off my videos, good way to start. Then the next question is, do you want to buy new or used equipment? All right, there's pros and cons to it. New equipment is more expensive, but there's less chance of disease. There's almost no chance of disease. The most common disease that we worry about is the American foul brood. So if you buy used equipment, there is a slight chance that you could have American foul brood, because American foul brood spores, they're not harmful to humans, but the spores can live for decades. There's a study, ongoing study, that they've been studying how long those spores can live, and those spores so far live 40 years in this study, and you can't kill it with alcohol, you can't kill it with bleach, anything like that. So you have to be very careful when you get used equipment and know the person you're getting it from. Used equipment is a lot cheaper, but it comes with some risk. If you are in a state that has a treatment chamber, you can actually take the woodenware, and like I'm in North Carolina, you can actually call your state apiary inspector. They'll come and get your gear, and then you can have it, send it up to the ETO chamber. I forgot what it stands for, ETO, but it's basically, it treats the woodenware and will kill the American foul brood spores that are in there. But again, there's only a few places in the U.S. that have that capability to treat those. So I mostly recommend you go with new equipment. When you buy new equipment, you want to determine whether you want to buy pre-assembled or unassembled and painted or unpainted. Obviously, the more work that's involved on the manufacturer's part, the more expensive it's going to be. So a new painted high body might cost you 20 bucks. Whereas if you were to buy it unassembled and unpainted, it might cost you as little as $15, depending on what the current wood prices are going right now. That being said, if you have just a little bit of woodworking tools, you can actually make the equipment for dirt cheap, at least half of what it costs. For example, prior to the wood gouges being going on, I could buy a 1 by 12 by 8 foot at my local wood store, Lowe's, and back then it was $15, now it's $25. And I could, if I were to buy a medium or a deep high body, unassembled, unpainted, it would, at my local beef store, it would cost me about $12 to $15. I can make that for about $8.50. A hive top at my local beef store would cost about $22, or a bottom board would cost me about $22. I can make it for about $1.80, again, prior to the wood gouges going up, so you could add probably about 50% more than that. So again, it doesn't take a lot of carpentry skills, just a simple table saw and a compound miter saw and some calibration tools. It really doesn't take a lot. So if you're going for more than maybe a dozen hives or so, maybe 10 hives or more, it may be more beneficial for you to pay for the equipment, to construction equipment, and build your own equipment. At some point I'll create some videos on how to do that, but right now I don't have any of those for now. All right, so getting on with the lesson. Next thing we're going to talk about is protective equipment. At a very minimum, you want to use a veil. All right, there are a lot of different styles of veils. The reason you want to use a veil is because if you get a bee sting in your eye, you've got a serious medical problem right off the bat. So at a very minimum, if you're opening up a hive and doing inspections, you want to use some type of veil. It can be as simple as one of those little mosquito nets that you buy from your local store, Walmart, or any sports store, or you can go to your bee store and get it with a hat, and this has the little straps that go underneath your armpits and then clip back on. I typically wear this if I'm going out and I'm opening the top and I'm feeding. But if I'm actually pulling out frames of honeybees, I'll take it to the next level. And the next level is getting either a jacket or a full suit. When you buy a jacket, and again, I've got a separate video on protective gear. It talks about suits, and it talks about smokers, and it talks about masks and things like that. You might want to watch that as well. When you buy a jacket, I encourage you to get either a full suit or a jacket. When you buy the jacket or the suit, they're going to come in two types of material types. It's either going to be a solid material or material that has holes in it that bees can't get through, and they call that a ventilated jacket or a ventilated suit. I highly encourage you to get a ventilated jacket or a ventilated suit, because when it gets to be in the warm months or the hot months, you'll appreciate having the ventilation coming through your suit, vice having the cheaper, and it's really not that much more expensive if you were to get the solid material version of this, and this are the pants. So if you start off with just the jacket, and the jacket and the suit always come with the veil. If you choose to get just the jacket, you can later go back and get the pants. And that's what I did. Is I'm going to toss this to the side. Again, my first year, I started off with the jacket, and I realized the bees were stinging me in the legs too much. So I later went back and purchased a set of pants, and then I just ordered a pair of suspenders on Amazon and used that instead of trying to use the little cinch rope that's in the front of the pants. Again, another good tool to have. And then if you are kind of squeamish about bees, or if you find that you're getting stung a lot, then you might consider going to a full suit. When you buy your jacket or suit, it's going to come in one of two hat styles. It's going to come with a hat style that is perfectly round like this, and then it's got one that has these vent areas up on top as well. It's personal preference. This is actually the cheaper style of hood versus the more round one. I personally prefer this style, the more of an oval shape instead of the total round hat, simply because it allows more light in, and I find myself being able to spot the eggs easier. And another tool, if you're having trouble spotting the eggs, you can also use a flashlight and reading glasses to help you spot the glasses. That won't be in my video, the equipment to show it to you, but again, it's a good tool equipment to have as well. So again, a ventilated suit is a good thing to have. When you get your jacket or your suit, I highly encourage you, one, to get it from your local bee supplier, one, to give back to the local community, and two, go to your local bee supplier. You can try on the suits and the jackets there. When you get your suit or your jacket, I highly encourage you to get a size that is at least 1 to 2 sizes larger than you typically wear. And the reason for that is if you go out in cooler weather, it allows you to layer up and stay warm yourself while you're messing with the bees. I generally do not open up my hive and inspect individual frames unless it's 64 degrees or higher. But if I need to go out and feed in the cooler months to put feed in the top feeder, which is what I use, a hive top feeder, I'll layer up, put my suit on, and then go out. So get a suit or a jacket that's 1 to 2 sizes larger than what you typically need. The next thing you're going to want to have is some type of glove. So you can get gloves that are ventilated and unventilated, and the gloves, it really doesn't matter a whole lot. So it doesn't matter if you get the ventilated or not. They're going to come in either a goat skin, which is the most common, or you can get thicker cowhide leather gloves, but they're starting to become harder and harder to find because they don't sell a lot of them. Again, go to your local bee supplier and try on the gloves. When you're going to put these on, you put your suit on first, and then you put the gloves, your hand in the gloves, and then the main portion of the glove goes up and over the suit. Again, good item to have. Next item, if you don't want to, and there's pros and cons to gloves. When you use gloves, your hands are less sensitive, but your hands are protected from the bees. Some people don't like to wear gloves. Some people don't wear anything but a veil. I know beekeepers don't wear anything at all. I think they're crazy because they're inviting the bees to sting them in the eyes. So again, wear at a minimum, as I said earlier, a veil and some type of glove and a suit is what I wear as well. Again, so I'll wear a full suit and glove. If you are in a situation where you need really to have good tactile sensitivity, you can use these nitrile gloves and they'll work fine if you don't want to bare hands. Some beekeepers will say that the bees won't sting through the nitrile gloves. I can tell you they do from personal experience. They'll sting you through these nitrile gloves, but you do have a little bit more feel with the nitrile gloves. I've used them in the past it's not that big a deal. But I mostly use the gloves simply because I know I'm going to get stung a lot. Okay, when you wear equipment out into the apiary, do not wear black, do not wear dark brown, do not wear clothing that is fuzzy. The reason for that, that looks like a predator to the honeybees, and the guard bees will come after you. And I already talked about I recommended getting ventilated versus a solid material. And then the other thing you can do for protective gear is if you're afraid of the bees coming up inside your pants legs, you can either take a piece of cord and wrap around the bottom of your pants legs, or they make these Velcro straps. You can also do it. I've had, in all the years I've been beekeeping, I've had bees crawl up my pants leg maybe 3 times over the years. So to me, they're not worth the expense of getting. But again, it is an option if you're afraid of that. Again, I do not recommend it because you're wasting your money. Okay, so now we're talking about, that's a very basic protective clothing you need. When you get into treating the honeybees for mites and things like that, there are other protective gear that you'll need. And again, if you watch my video on how to use oxalic acid, I specifically talk about respirators and things like that you'll need, but that's a separate class. All right, so very basic tools that you're going to need. You're going to need some kind of smoker. A smoker does one of several things. When you smoke it, it helps mask the honeybees' pheromones, so it helps stop them from communicating, especially the guard bees. It also drives them away from the area where you're trying to work. So for example, if you're trying to close your hive or you're trying to pull off frame, you can simply smoke the bees lightly. You're not trying to barbecue the bees. And then you lightly smoke them and they'll run away. And then the third thing it does, the honeybees think, oh, there's a fire. So they immediately start engorging themselves on honey because they need about 6 to 8 pounds of honey to draw out a pound of comb in nature. So when they swarm, which is basically what they would think they're doing, they're going to leave because there's a fire, they start engorging on honey and they're less likely to come after you with a full belly, so to speak. So when you buy a smoker, it comes in typically a 4-inch diameter by 7-inch tall, which is what this is, or they make a 4-inch by 10-inch tall smoker. And the difference is how much burn time you have. I personally just have the 4x7 smoker. And then what I strongly recommend is when you get it, you get one with this metal cage around it. What that is a finger guard to help protect your fingers from burning, because a smoker has a bellows and it pumps smoke through this. And then there's a burn chamber in this. This is a burn chamber. So, I'll see what my smoker pin finally fell out after all these years. Anyway, it's a burn chamber. So get one with this protective cage, because think about it, if you don't, you're going to burn your hands on the burn chamber. So do be careful with that. Why they sell them without the cages, I don't know, but they do. All right, so next thing you're going to want to work the bees is some kind of a hive tool. And again, I've got another video on how to use hive tools and the various hive tools. In my apiary, I get them on Amazon instead of getting them at my local bee store, because I can get them for about $3 to $5 each, by paying $12 or $10 at my local bee store. So get them on Amazon. My 2 favorite hive tools to use are this traditional L-shaped hive tool and a J-hook. If I need to scrape off excess propolis or beeswax off the hive, I'll use the traditional L-shaped hive tool. If I'm lifting frames out, my favorite tool, and yours probably will be too, is the J-hook. Because you can still do some scraping and you can still pry open the hive bodies. And that's another thing it's used for, is used to pry open the hive bodies, separate the hive bodies. But to lift the frames, you're going to really appreciate this J-hook. Again, get them on Amazon. You can get them for about $3 to $5 a piece. Other tools you're going to need is, I would consider getting a bee brush. A bee brush is very handy to, just as its name implies, brushing off the bees. You don't have to use chemicals or anything to chase them away. So if I'm wanting to inspect something, I can lightly brush the bees away. It's also handy once you start extracting honey. We do not recommend that you extract honey your first year beekeeping, because the bees need that. Your second year or beyond is when we recommend that you extract honey if you're going to. Again, a bee brush is a very good tool unless you have a lot of hives. If you've got a lot of hives, then there are other tools. Again, separate video, but there's other tools that you can use for if you have many hives. I typically run up to 15 hives, depending on the year. Right now I'm running 2 because I've got other interests this year. But even when I was running 15, a bee brush is all I would ever need. I'd brush the bees off, take my honey, put it in a separate box, and use it. So a bee brush is very handy to have. Next tool to consider, but I think you do not need it. Some people love frame grips, and as name implies, you simply reach down with the frame grip and then pull it out. And what it does, it allows you to manipulate the frame in one hand. I've got a separate video on the various frame grips, and then basically shows you how to use them. Some are better than others, and expensive does not necessarily mean better. This is the cheapest one out there. This one has this little hive tool built into it. I haven't seen this in a couple years now with the hive tool built into it, but I'm sure it still exists. But again, it's a good little frame grip if you're going to use it. I personally never use them. The next thing you're going to want to consider, if you want to learn how to mark your own queens, and there are pros and cons to it. I generally do not mark my own queens, but again, I've got another video on on queen marking cages. I recommend, cutting straight to the chase, I highly recommend if you're going to mark your own queens and you're squeamish about picking up the queen, simply get this one-handed queen catcher. Again, you go to Man Lake is the best one I've found. Again, watch my video on queen marking cages, and it explains that. And you're going to need some kind of water-based pen to mark the queen. And there actually is a color code system. Again, watch that video, and it explains the colors and how the international marking colors to determine the queen's age. Again, something you're going to want to get if you're going to mark your queens. The next thing you're going to want to do is I highly recommend that you get some type of or make your own nail kit. So what I have in here, and again, I'll have a still photo, but I have little nails of various sizes whenever I assemble the hive bodies or the frames mostly. And if I want to cross wire the frames, I've got eyelets. I've got a spur embedder if I want to cross wire my frames. I've got a couple different types of utility knives. I've got the thicker one and then the smaller type of utility knife. I've also got a pair of 6-inch diagonal wire pliers in here to help you trim off a foundation. When you buy foundation, sometimes it does not fit your frame exactly. So what I do is I take a metal rule, and then I take my foundation down and I simply scribe along the wax, and then it leaves the metal, and then I pull the wax off. Usually I'll take off about 1/8 of an inch off the bottom of the foundation if it doesn't fit my frame. And then from there, I again score it with my utility knife. And then from there, you'll have those excess wires hanging down. And the easiest way is just take these little diagonal wire pliers and trim those wires off, and then you're good to go. And then I've got, if you cross wire frames, I've got a video on that. You're going to want a grommet or eyelet tool, as well as these brass or aluminum eyelets to put in end bars. Again, and then when you get one of these eyelet punches or eyelet tools, are called a couple different names. Go out and buy some Plasti-Dip. You can either get it at Amazon or Lowe's carries it. I'm sure Home Depot and those major stores as well. But anyhow, you take this steel tool, put it in a pair of pliers, and dip it down into this plastic dip and coat this. The reason you want to do that, if you don't do that, this little hive eyelet tool, will rust on you, and you'll have rust everywhere. So by dipping it in this little plastic dip, it solves that problem. Next thing you want some kind of little multi-tool. I've just got a small one here. It's handy for pulling out stuff that I can't reach with my small hammer. And then a simple black Sharpie pen is another thing I have in. And then I have some hive staples in here. Hive staples are used for whenever I want to transport a hive and I don't want to use straps, I'll just put these in the sides of the box and connect 2 boxes together that way with these little hive staples. I usually have about a dozen inside my little kit. I use them maybe once every 2 or 3 years if I move stuff around. All right, so that's my little box. And again, you get this little box at Walmart, Lowe's, just a little parts kit. When you buy the parts kit, I recommend you get one that has the removable dividers so that you can configure things as you need to. All right, so I'm gonna set this aside so I won't be talking about it anymore. All right, next thing you wanna get is you're gonna need some type of hammer to assemble your own gear. Again, save yourself some money, make your own gear, or at least buy it unassembled and then assemble itself. And if you buy frames in bulk, you can save a lot of money. For example, if you were to buy an individual frame at your local beef store, it's probably going to cost you about $2 to $4, depending on what you get and what your prices are in your area. You can buy them in bulk for about $1.20 now. If buying them in bulk from like Man Lake, it's where I get mine from. You can also get them from Dayton or any of the other major beef suppliers. And when I say buy them in bulk, usually you get a huge discount if you order 100 or more, and they'll come in this big box. And most of the big box stores will offer free shipping if you order $100 or more from them of stuff. So again, if you buy a bulk order of frames, they're going to cost you about $1.20 now. When I was doing it, when I bought mine, I bought 500 years ago, and I got them for like 80 cents a piece, and I've still got some. When you do that, a good tool to have is a small tack hammer. And the best one that I found, because it has the longer head on it, the larger head, is go to Harbor Freight or order it, and they'll ship it to you for about $3 or $4. Is this Pittsburgh 7-ounce hammer. The reason for that is when you get ready to install your foundation, and again, I've got a video on how to install foundation. I'm not trying to plug my own videos, but a lot of these stuffs I'm talking about, I've already got videos on. So as you're tacking in the foundation, this longer head can get in closer. So again, very good tool to have. Pittsburgh hammer from Harbor Freight. And it's not that expensive. Hold that. All right. Other tools, again, we talked about small utility knives. And then I consider it a tool, but you want to get a mineral oil trap. And what this is, it helps trap the small hive beetles. When you buy them, you can again get them at your local beef store, order them on Amazon. Depending on where you get them, they'll run you anywhere between $1 to $2 each, and they'll come in a little strip like this. So that's all you do is you take your utility knife, and then you'll simply separate them. When you cut them out, you have to be careful your knife doesn't deviate and you don't cut into the side one, or sometimes they'll pop off like that. Most of the time they don't do that for me. So I usually have to use a small utility knife and then separate them. And again, what you'll do is, with these is you'll simply take them and you'll place them inside your hive. I put one in each box, and I'll put them on opposite sides of my hive box, so that if the hive beetles move around, I've got a chance catching on either side of the box. And then you'll just go to your local pharmacy store and buy some mineral oil, and then you fill this thing about half full. They make other styles of mineral oil traps that have removable caps, and you can refill them. I found that my small hive beetles ignore them, and I actually catch more small hive beetles with these disposable beetle traps. Thanks. Beetle blaster is what it's called. So again, I highly encourage you to get one per hive body whenever you get it. So again, they're good to have. All right, getting on with other equipment. All right, I talked to it earlier. I don't have it here. It's over my shop still. Again, if you need to trim your foundation, I highly encourage you to get a metal yardstick. And I like this. There's one that they sell at Lowe's that's yellow, and it's only about 1 inch wide, 1.5 inches wide, and that makes a perfect size for making starter strips if you're on a budget and you don't want to buy a lot of foundation. You can make these little starter strips like I was telling you about, and then bees will draw out the rest of the comb down from it. And the starter strips just gives them an idea of, okay, here's my cell size, and it draws them out. So again, you can use your yardstick for that. Okay, And again, I've got a video as part of another video on how to assemble a frame, if I remember correctly, and I show you that process of how to trim foundation. All right. Next thing you want is some type of Varroa mite count kit. I've got a video that shows you how to make one for the sugar shake method using a peanut butter jar and in 1/8 inch mesh screening. If you don't have that, if you don't eat a lot of peanut butter jars, and eat a lot of peanut butter, then you can actually get one of these Varroa check mite counts things. And again, the reason you need to do that is Varroa mites can introduce other diseases inside your colony to the bees, or they can, because the Varroa mite sucks on the fat bodies of the honeybees, it can actually make the bees weak. So again, get some kind of Varroa mite count jar. Either you make it or you can buy one of these Varroa check at your local bee store, and it can be either used as a sugar shake, or this one is mostly used for an alcohol wash method of doing a Varroa mite count. So again, another very good tool to have. All right, next thing I want to talk about is paint. I'm going to talk about my configuration of my hives here in a minute, but when you paint your hives, you're going to want to paint anything that's on the outside. When you use paint, you can use interior or exterior. I have people tell me all the time that you have to use exterior. That's not true. One of my mentors early on was Don the Fat Bee Man. He's out of Georgia, and he's 74 years old with over 5,000 hives, and he just goes to the store, to Lowe's or Home Depot, and he gets the mist-tinted paints, and he'll get a gallon for like $9 or less. I'll get a quart for $3 less. And he said it really doesn't matter, and I've seen testimony of that from out my apiary. I've got hives I painted 5 years ago, and they've got a little mildew on them, but the bees don't care. So the main difference between an exterior paint and an interior paint is an exterior paint will have a mildew preventative added into it, whereas the interior paints don't. And you're going to coat these things with 2 to 3 coats of paint. So some of my hives in my apiary, because the mist tint paint that was available that day was pink. Bees don't care. So I painted it pink, and then I used another mist tinted color like brown or light brown or green or something like that, and I used that as the second coating. And those hives may have a little mildew on the outside, doesn't affect the bees. You never, ever, ever want to paint anything inside of the bees where the bees touch. One, they're going to coat it with propolis anyway, so they're going to put all the exposed wood on the inside with a thin coat of propolis, so you don't need to do that. The only exception to that is at the front entrance to one of your bottom board, you can paint about 1 inch inside that opening where the box sits, and you got that bottom board. You can paint about 1 inch inside there, simply to keep the water from wicking in there anyway. And then the other thing you could do, if you wanted to, you could paint the top and the bottom edges of your box. If you do that, though, there's pros and cons to it. One, the theory is if you paint it like that, it helps the water, keep the water from wicking up and weakening the wood more. The downfall of that, when you paint that, is when you have paint on the top of one and the bottom of another, it causes the boxes to stick. So I stopped painting mine years ago, and it really doesn't matter because, again, the bees are going to create propolis on the edges anyway, so the chances of it getting a significant amount of water in there and damaging are slim and none. So again, I stopped painting the edges, but again, I do paint the outside. All right. Again, another cheap place to buy throwaway brushes, again, is go to Harbor Freight, get their 2-inch brushes. They're about 30 cents each. Use them one time, throw them away. You wasted 30 cents, not a big deal, instead of trying to re-clean your brushes all the time. All right, so we talked about that. Next thing we're going to talk about is honey production. Like I said, we highly encourage you not to get honey your first year. But if you do, The things that you're going to want to consider is getting some kind of extractor. Extractors are bulky. They come in either manual or electric, and they come with either tangentially or radially. What that means is, think of spokes on a bicycle wheel. Coming out from the center of the wheel, going to the edge of the wheel, that is radially, and then tangentially is perpendicular to that. So when you buy a extractor, I highly encourage you to get one that is electric, because those of you who buy the manual version are quickly going to convert to the electric upgrade kit the following year. So get an electric motor one, and then I recommend that you get one that is radially or a combination. For example, I have a Maxent 3300, I think it is. Anyhow, it's a 6 to 9 Maxent, and it holds 6 to 9 frames. It holds 6 radially and then 3 additionally tangentially. So it can hold up to 9 frames, or I can run 3 tangentially or 6 radially, however I want to configure my frames in there. Again, Maxent is my brand that I like, but other people like Dayton's or other brands. Again, your personal choice. But again, I recommend, 1, you don't take honey your first year. 2, a lot of things, if you go to your local beach chapter, a lot of times they have one in the chapter that you can just use or use for a small fee. So before you consider buying an extractor, look around, see if somebody's got one for you to use. Again, we recommend that you don't use it the first year. Next thing you want to do, if you're going down in the honey extraction realm though, is buying an uncapping tank. If you were to buy, like I said, that Maxent 6 to 9 frame extractor that I have, they also sell an uncapping tank, a stainless steel uncapping tank. It's about $300 to $400 when I bought it. Hindsight, I wouldn't do that again. If you go to other beast suppliers, they will have a plastic version of all it is it's 2 tubs, and then it's got a bar that goes across it with a little nail that you rest the frame on. I would go with the much cheaper, I think it's about $150 for the plastic version. Go with that, and it will work just as fine. And then you're going to need something to cut the cappings off of the comb. So again, you can either use manual, just use a knife. You can use a sport utility knife if you wanted to, like a fillet knife, or they do make a manual knife that's specific for honey. Again, I'll try to remember to put all photos of these in the final product for you. Or they do make, what I recommend is they have an electric knife with a temperature control. They have one without the temperature control and one with the temperature control. Spend the extra money and get the one with the temperature control. You'll like it in the very end if you go down that. And then one of the things you could do if you wanted to is a honey refractometer. A refractometer allows you to test how much humidity is in the honey. Honey that is over 18.6% of moisture content can ferment. Also, if you're in honey competitions, if you have 18.6 or higher humidity in your honey, it's disqualified. And again, a refractometer is something that you don't need your first year. All right, so next thing we're going to get into is getting into your equipment. You're going to have to make some choices early on. And for this purpose of this equipment demonstration, I'm going to be talking only about a Langstroth hive, simply because the parts are easily obtained and it's the most common hive configuration to get. There's Langstroth, there's Worry hives, there's horizontal hives, but for this video, I'm only going to talk about the Langstroth hive. So one of the first things you need to consider is what type of box are you going to want to do? Are you going to want and on my over to the far left over here, your far right, you're going to see I've got a 5-frame setup with all medium-sized boxes, and then I've got what I use out in my apiary, which are 8-frame boxes with deeps on it. And I also use mediums for honey supers. But boxes come in either a deep, which is, as its name implies, it uses a deep frame. It comes in a medium-sized frame, or it comes in a shallow frame. And then you have to get the corresponding box that goes along with it, either a deep, a medium, or a shallow. And the next thing you have to determine is one, what size depth you're going to get. The other thing is you have to determine what the width is. You can get, the most common boxes are a 5 frame, an 8 frame, or a 10 frame wide box. A 5 frame box, and that's what I have over on the far side over there. A 5 frame box is mostly used for a nucleus colony, or a nuke as we call it. Although you can use it for to keep the bees in year round. My first year beekeeping, I went through with 7 double deeps. I had 2 deep hive bodies on each hive. Hive is where they live, the colony or the actual bees. I went through my first year with 7 double deep nucleus size or 5 frame size boxes, and they came out of the winter just fine. So it can be done with a 5 frame box. But the most common is either an 8 frame box or a 10 frame. So if you look at this configuration I have here, I show you the different sizes. This is from top to bottom, this is an 8 frame wide, a 5 frame wide box. The second one down is an 8 frame box, and then the bottom is a 10 frame wide box. You can see how wide they are. There are pros and cons to each one. Again, I have a lot of 5 frame boxes. If I want to make splits and things like that, I'll use those. I mostly run 8 frame boxes in mine, simply because they're lighter and because there's 2 less frames in it. The other thing I like about it is when you buy an 8 frame hive body configuration, 8 frame boxes have a little bit more space in between. Once you put all 8 frames in, there's a lot more space on the outside edges of it. Whereas the 10 frame boxes, it's a very tight fit laterally. Once you get all 10 frames in there, there's not a whole lot of space on either side. So I personally like the 8 frames simply because there's a lot more room in there to manipulate frames and spread things out should I want to. Again, personal preferences. A lot of people like to run 10 frames. I personally run 8 frames. All right. And again, the dimensions are, again, the deep hive body is 9 5/8 inch high. They're all 19 7/8 inch long. And then by the number of frames wide. So it's a 5 frame, 8 frame, or a 10 frame. A medium box, which is what this is, excuse me, is 6 5/8 inches high by 19 7/8 inches long by the number of frames wide, either 5, 8, or 10. And then they come in a shallow box as well. A shallow box comes in 2 different sizes. It's either a 6 5/8 inch high or a 5 7/8 inch high. And what a shallow box is used for is for cut comb honey. So if you're into cut comb honey, use that size box. You can also use cut comb honey with a medium-sized box. But a shallow box we do not recommend for raising bees in for the brood chamber, simply because there's not enough space for the queen to lay eggs practically. You just don't get as many cells. On a deep frame, there's roughly about 7,000 cells per side or per frame. So again, there's 2 trains of thoughts when you buy your frames and the associated hive bodies. You can either go, as I have over on my 5 frame setup, you can either run 3 medium frames, or you can run, as I have here, you can run deep frames. The reason some people like to go all mediums or some people like to go all deeps is so that they only have to buy 1 frame size. I personally run a combination of the 2. I personally like to run deeps for my brood chambers, and then if I want to have honey supers, then I will use the medium-sized boxes and frames for my honey supers. And the reason for that is I know that I have to have 2 different sets of frames on hand, one's mediums and one's deeps. But the reason for that is almost all treatments that you do for mites and pesticides for pests require that the honey supers be removed. So if the pesticide ever gets used with those frames, you're not supposed to use them again for honey production that humans can consume. It's perfectly fine for the honeybees, but you shouldn't use it for the humans. So in my theory is I run deeps for the bees. Anything honeys that's in the frames on the deeps, the bees get to keep. Anything that's in the mediums, because I know I have to take it off, the honey supers off, and I don't have to worry about pesticide residue inside my honey or my comb, I personally run mediums for my honey supers and deeps for my brood chambers. Again, some people, as like I said earlier, some people like an all medium setup or all deeps, because again, you can use those for honey production and for brood, and that way they only have to buy one frame. Frames are fairly inexpensive, so I personally run deeps for my brood chambers and mediums for my honey supers. You make your personal choice what you like. All right. Also on the mediums terminology, it's a medium frame or medium box. You'll also hear the term called an Illinois super, as in the state. So don't be alarmed if you hear what's an Illinois super. It's just a medium box. That's all it is, or a medium frame. All right. And then the next thing, once you determine what size box you're going to have and what size associated frame you're going to want, next thing you're going to have to choose is what type of frame. There are different types of frames and many configurations. Again, if you watch my video on frames, I talk about that. There are different configurations. You can order it in any configuration you want. So the parts of a frame is a top bar, a bottom bar, and an end bar. So you can get the end bars with or without the holes. The holes are good for if you want to run cross wires. So they're a good thing to have. And then they got different types of top bars and different types of bottom bars, and it all depends on what you want to do with it. For example, the top bar comes in either a wedge top, which means it has as its name implies, a wedge. You can use your utility knife and then cut this wedge off and then put your foundation in, pin it in, and then tack it in. Again, if you watch my frame video, I show you how to do that. And I also talk about the various frames. I have photos in there for you as well. So it comes in either a wedge top or a groove top. A groove top, as its name implies, is just a groove. It doesn't have a removable wedge. On the bottom bar, again, it's a groove or a split, which means when you can buy it, you either get this groove that goes all the way through it. It's three-sided. There's no hole in the bottom, or a split version, which means they've taken the saw blade and gone all the way up through this thing. And usually there's a little bit of wood on the very ends for the bottom bar to stay intact. But there's a split all the way through this. And it's personal preference which one you like. The only time it's really going to matter is when you go to get your foundation. If you buy plastic foundation, you're going to want to get the groove top and the groove bottoms, so that you simply take your plastic foundation and then pop it in and out. And when you buy your foundation, you can get natural beeswax, which is what I recommend. Some people prefer to get the plastic foundation, and it comes in colors. It either comes in black or yellow most commonly. And yellow is most commonly because it resembles the natural beeswax. Some people argue that the black helps you spot the eggs easier. And you can buy these plastic versions with and without wax on them. I highly encourage you to, if you go to this, I personally don't use them. I highly encourage you to spend the extra few cents and get the ones with wax on it so you don't have to do it yourself. The pros to using plastic foundation is you have a nice uniform area for the bees to draw comb out. Disadvantages is when comb gets old and brown, you should replace it, because what it's getting brown from is all the cocoons. As the bees emerge as adults, they leave the cocoons behind from their pupae stage, and after a while that comb gets old, and you should replace it once it becomes dark brown. So when you have the plastic foundation, you have to scrape it off with a hive tool or some kind of tool, or I've seen some people take a power washer and spray wash it out. It's a pain in the tush. So again, I don't use plastic foundation. All right. All right. I'm gonna set that down. So again, I use natural beeswax. All right. So we talked about that. All right. One other caution on the plastic foundation. Sometimes, especially with the black plastic foundation, sometimes the bees will reject that. And if you've got a whole box full of them, they may just abscond. Absconding is when the bees just up and leave. All of the bees just up and leave. So be careful with the black plastic foundation. Sometimes the bees will reject it. All right. All right, so now we're getting on with the typical hive components. So I'm going to move closer to my end down here, and I'll show you my typical configuration I have in my apiary. Starting, let me see how much time I've got on my video. Okay. Okay, so from bottom to top, and I'll tell you what's optional and what I recommend that you have, what you absolutely need to get. So on the bottom, I forgot one piece. Is a sloped bottom board. You are going to want to put your bees on some type of hive stand, whether that be as simple as cinder blocks or cinder blocks with landscape timbers on it. What a hive stand does, it gets the hive off the ground and keeps moisture from coming in the hive as much. The other thing it does, by getting, the higher you get the hive off the ground, if you have a predator such as a raccoon or a skunk mostly, they love coming up and scratching at the front of the hive, and the guard bees come out and investigate them, and they'll snatch them and eat them. So when you raise your hive, get a hive stand and raise your hive off the ground, it exposes the belly or the abdomen of the predator to bee stings, and it's a deterrent for those predators. So I highly encourage you to get some or make some type of hive stand. When you do it, you're going to want to put your hive, remember the hive where they live, the colony of the bees, you want to put your hive, make your hive stand level, and then put a piece of wood in the back so that it has a slight tilt forward. And what that does, that keeps the rain from backing up inside the colony. So what I'll typically do is I'll level out my hive stand, and I'll take a piece of 1x material, which is actually 3/4 inch tall, and then put that underneath the back, and that gives me the slope that I need. I know I exaggerated it here. Again, good thing to have. In addition to your hive stand, they have this sloped landing board stand. It's optional whether you want to get this or not. What this does, it has typically a 45-degree angle landing board on it. It's handy for when the bees come in, especially those they're loaded with nectar as they're coming in. They can sometimes miss this bottom board. It's optional. I highly encourage it. If you make your own equipment, you can make it for about $3. If you buy it from your local bee store, they're going to cost you about $12 for a hive stand. To my opinion, they're worth it. I didn't have them the first 2 or 3 years that I was running bees, but I've got them on all my hives now, so I highly encourage you to get that. And we talked about the hive stands. I would not buy the single hive stand. They're about $60 for a single hive stand. Hold one hive. Again, get a couple cinder blocks, get a couple landscape timbers, or I'll post a video, a still photo of the ones I have. I made them out of 2x6s for about, I think, $40, $50 with the metal dog bowl moats to help prevent ants. Again, I'll show you a picture of that in the final version. The next piece up that you do have to get is a bottom board. Bottom board, as its name implies, is the very bottom of your hive component. You can get them in either solid bottom boards like this. It's all wood, and there's pros and cons to it. I personally like the solid bottom boards myself because it's a little bit warmer in the winter for the bees, and it doesn't allow wax and stuff to fall all the way to the ground and attract ants as much. Or you can get a screen bottom board, which as its name implies has a 1/8 inch mesh screen. And then it always comes with an integrated pest management board or an IPM board. And so all it is it's a corrugated plastic board, much like the political signs are, or at least used to be. And what that is again, you could spray this. It has a pattern on it with squares. You can spray this with some kind of cooking spray, you know, Pam or some other cooking spray. And then what it does when the varroa mite falls off, it traps them on here, and you kind of get a sense of how much of a varroa mite problem you have. They used to teach there used to be so many mites per square. You'd know how many have. We've since gotten away from that theory, and now it just gives you an indication that you got mites. I personally don't use them. Some people swear by these screen bottom boards. They keep the IPM board out until the winter, and then, or in case they're getting ready to do a oxalic acid treatment, and then they'll put the board in, or a piece of Luan in the bottom just while they're doing the oxalic acid treatment. But what they like for is it provides more ventilation, especially they'll even leave it off during the winter. Again, it gives them more ventilation in their theory. Again, I personally don't use them in my apiary, but personal choice. If you ask 10 beekeepers, the adage is, if you ask 10 beekeepers, you get 12 different answers. They'll all be right. And there's people just as passionate about screen bottom boards as there are people that are passionate about the solid bottom boards. You have to make your choice of which one you like. I personally like the solid bottom boards myself. All right, that being said, I'm going to stop my video at this point and then change out the battery, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back now. So all I did was replace my battery. I know it's a long video, but again, it's something I usually teach at the bee schools, either during the actual class, or if I'm starting to run out of time, I'll usually teach more during the breaks. All right, so we left off with your choice of whether you want to use a solid bottom board or a screen bottom board. I highly encourage, in my apiary, I like the solid bottom boards. Again, others love the screen bottom boards, are just as passionate about that. The next thing you're going to want, you'll see on my kit, before I get into it, I'll just say what I've got. How about that? I've got a raised hive stand. It's about 18 inches off the ground, made out of 2x6s and 4x4s. 4x4s are the posts. All untreated except for the 4x4s because they can come in contact with the ground potentially. Those are treated. Other than that, you never want to use treated wood any place the bees can touch. Again, posts are the exception to that. So I've got a raised hive stand. I'll have a photo of that for you. Then I run the sloped landing board, and then I run a solid bottom board. I use a slatted rack. I'll explain what these are in a minute. Then I use 2 deep hive bodies for my brood chambers for the bees. And then if I'm during the nectar flow, spring and fall, not so much during the fall as much, but occasionally, mostly during the spring nectar flow, if I'm wanting to collect honey that year, I will run mediums for my honey supers on top of my 2 deep hive bodies. Then I run a Miller hive top feeder, and then because I'm using a hive top feeder, I will use a screened ventilated inner cover to keep the bees from flying into my SERP. Honeybees are great flyers. They're horrible swimmers. So even though this is a screen protected areas, I'll show it to you in a little bit, the honeybees can fly out the front and then still fly into the SERP from the back. So I use a ventilated inner cover. And then I use a telescoping top. When I get to that portion, there's a telescoping top and a migratory top. Again, I was just showing you what these are. I run the telescoping top. So that's my configuration. And then I'll have a red brick on top of this. A red brick is my signal device to me of what's going on inside my hive. All right, so getting on to where I'm starting off with. So again, I left off with the bottom board. I got my hive stand. I got my solid bottom board. The next thing you're going to want to get, and it usually comes if you get a kit, is a entrance reducer. Entrance reducers, you get either a wooden one, or you can make it. It's easiest, just 3/4 by 3/4 material. It's not a big deal to make. It's usually just scrap wood. And then it has these little slots. It has a wider slot, and they'll typically have a single slot on a 90-degree to it. It's a smaller opening. Or you can buy a metal version of a entrance reducer. But the metal ones always have the little drilled holes in them. I personally don't like those. They are mostly used for mice guard during the cold months. But you want to get a wooden entrance reducer. Again, they're dirt cheap to buy, or you just make it out of scrap wood. And the reason for that is if you get robbing, or if you have a weak colony, you can quickly put an entrance reducer in and narrow the amount of space that the guard bees have to guard. So if you had one of these entrance reducers that have the smaller slot at a 90-degree to this larger slot, you simply rotate it down and you give them a smaller. When I make my own, that's what I've done here, as I made one with a larger slot, I just cut it shorter so that my small spot is on the very end. And if I want them to have the larger entrance, then I'll just put that, and they'll have that to deal with if they want. All right, so again, the purpose again is to protect the hive from robbing a weak colony, or it also serves as a mouse guard during the winter. Again, you're going to want one of these. When you buy, the next thing you're going to want is some kind of feeder. If you buy a hive kit from your bee stores, they typically come with an entrance feeder, or it's also known as a Boardman feeder, and it's either a wooden or a plastic, or sometimes wood with metal top feeder. And it's all it is it has a hole drilled in the top that has a spot for this. Now I can't get it out. A spot for a perforated. There we go. A spot for a perforated cap. You can see the small perforation caps in it. And then from there, and it has slots for the bees to come in. And then from there, you can put a quart or 2-quart jar and feed your sugar syrup in through the front entrance. So that's all it does. It slides in the front there. You can see what this looks like. That's this one's a little bit larger. Anyway, it'll slide in the front there. The disadvantage to a Boardman feeder or an entrance feeder is if you have syrup there, because it is at the very front, it can invite robbing from other colonies in the area. They can smell that sugar syrup, and they can quickly, because it's quick access to get inside, dart in, and get out, it invites robbing. So as a general rule of thumb, most master beekeepers recommend that you do not use a Boardman or an entrance feeder. They're cheap. They're typically about $5 for one of these, plus whatever you get for the quart jar. Disadvantage is, the advantage is you can quickly see how much they're going to draw them down. Disadvantage is you're going to constantly be filling these things up, these quart jars. They'll go through that in half a day sometimes. Again, it also invites robbing, so we highly discourage using these for using them for sugar syrup feeders. They do have their advantages though. If you have a case of nosema, which is a microsporidian, it causes the bees to get dysentery or diarrhea. One of the ways to treat that is, one, you just let it run its course. But two, the other way to help them is you want to give them fresh water. And one of the ways to do that is one of these Boardman feeders. You can put water in it and no syrup, no sugar syrup, and then feed water directly at the entrance of the hive. And again, because it's only water, it will not entice robbing. The other thing is during the hot months, you can actually use it to provide them water directly at the entrance of the hive instead of letting them go to your neighbor's pool, or in the case of my case, and I'm out in the farm, finding my wife's horse troughs, water troughs, which she does not like, nor does her horses. So again, you can use them that way. In my case, my apiary, I have a separate tub of water, and I add a little bit of chlorine to it, or bleach to it, just as a scent. And they find that, and it works just fine. And I have some floats in there for the honeybees to get their water on. So I have a local water source. So again, I rarely use this unless my bees get nosema, and I've had nosema once in 6 years. So it's not that big a deal. All right. So again, some kind of feeder. So again, common kit, they're cheap. The next step up is some people will buy these division board feeders. What these are is if you were to take out they displace a frame or two or three, depending on the size. They come in several different widths. And so all they do is they have a syrup chamber, and then the bees can get access from the top. When you buy one of these, they have versions with just the little rectangle, or they have the version with what we call the cap and ladder. The cap is this wooden portion, or the cheaper version will have a plastic cap on it, and then it has a ladder system. It's basically a tube with holes and allows the bees to crawl down, as its name implies. It's a ladder. They can crawl down in here and get to the syrup. And the theory is again, I told you bees are great flyers. They're horrible swimmers. By having a cap and ladder system, then you avoid as many bees drowning. They fly in, or they'll crawl in and lose their grip, and they'll fall in the syrup, and it's hard for them to get out. So by having a cap and ladder system, it makes it easy for them to get out, hopefully, and not drown as much. The advantage is it's an in-hive feeder. Like I said, the disadvantage is it takes the place of 1 to 3 frames, depending on how wide you get that feeder. The advantage is by a in-hive feeder, such as a division board feeder or a hive top feeder, you don't get robbing because the bees, bees from other colonies can't get to it. They have to go in through your entrance and up to the bees. By that time, they're found out by the other guard bees, and they're killed. So it prevents robbing. So it's a good thing. The disadvantage is, again, it takes the place of 1 to 3 frames. The other thing is you have to open up the hive entirely. So now you have bees coming out the top. As you're taking some kind of funnel or some kind of container that has a spigot on it, and then pouring it in through this small, 1.5 inch, 3 and 3/4 inch hole to pour the syrup in. So you run the risk of pouring syrup into the bees. I personally don't like it. I know beekeepers that love these things. I personally don't like them. I used to use them for demonstration. All right, so the third type, so I can talk about the Boardman feeder. I talk about the division board feeder. Again, I have a video on this specifically, so watch that if you want. The other type is a hive top feeder of some sort. So hive top feeders come in a lot of different configurations. The 3 most common types is this Miller feeder, which is, it has a slot in it, and it has the 1/8 inch mesh that goes up and over a board that separates that slot from the syrup chamber, and then it has a protective mesh from the outside. So the theory is the bees crawl up from underneath and then follow the ladder and get down on the ladder on the other side, or they'll catch the ladder, it's up on this screen that's up on top, and they'll crawl down and get the syrup and then crawl back down. And the theory is they can't get to this. Well, that theory is out the window because bees are great flyers. They come out the entrance of the hive and they'll fly up and they'll get into the syrup. So what I do to combat that is I've got a ventilated inner cover that I put on top of any type of hive top feeder. And what that does, that now protects the bees from drowning, so that they can't get into it from the inside, because they go up and they hit that mesh screen and they can get to the syrup, but they can't fly out. The bees that can fly out now come up, and because I've got a ventilated inner cover with this screening on it, this 1/8 inch mesh screen, they now can't get to it. The other advantage to this is whenever I get ready to feed, and there is a right way and a wrong way to put this Miller feeder on. Think about it, if your hive is tilted forward, you want that screen at the lower portion. Otherwise, if it's tilted back, when the syrup gets low enough, they can't get access to it. So you want to put the screening toward the front, so it's tilted down. So now I've got it configured so that when the bees fly out, I've got my screen protecting my syrup, and if I need to add more syrup, I can just take my telescoping top up, and the bees can't. I'm not disturbing the bees. I can see that the syrup's gone, and then I can simply pour my syrup through this screen and not have to worry about bees getting in there and drown. All right. The other type so that's a Miller feeder. The next one is what I call compartmented type of feeders. Again, this is a 5-frame version. That's 8 frame, they make 10 frame versions. A compartmented system has a slot going down the center of the feeder. Sometimes some versions will have the slot going the long axis of the feeder. Other versions like this one from Dadant Bee Supply, theirs is horizontal. There's pros and cons to both types. And again, you'll get different beekeepers with different pins. I personally like the Miller feeders now. I've used the Dadant type, compartmented type feeders for years. But I since used the Miller feeders. The advantage to the compartmented type of feeders though is it has 2 different chambers. So if, in theory, if I wanted to put syrup in one and granulated sugar or pollen patty in the other one, I could do it. Or if I wanted them to have just water, I could put that in there. So that's the advantage to a compartmented system. If you're going to go with one of these compartmented type of hive top feeders, I like the Dadant version myself, simply because the slot that they can come up through is horizontally across the short axis, so you have a larger target when you get ready to pour that 2-gallon bucket or 5-gallon bucket, depending on how you're mixing of syrup. You got a larger target to hit if it's one of these that's horizontal side to side slot versus the long skinny version where you have just a skinny slot on either side. So again, slot in the center, and then the 2 chambers either on the sides or in this case front and back. The front and back chambers are much easier to hit when you're pouring the syrup. Ask me how I know that. I've drowned a few bees that way by missing my mark. And then they come with, again, a lot of these will come with these little floating devices that go inside. They're just wood, light wood, that go inside there. There is a right way and a wrong way to put it in. If you look at it closer, you'll see that they have these little pieces of wood underneath. And if you put it upside down, what happens is when the syrup dries, when the bees have gone in there, if you have it upside down, now you've got this flat portion of the wood in contact with more of the syrup, which now dehydrates and becomes just dry sugar, and it sticks to it a lot more. So what you have to do is take your hive tool. I've got it over on the table. You have to take your hive tool and then pry it against the side to pop these up, because if you don't want to press against these little thin end pieces. So when you put it in with the wooden, the bigger chunks of wood down toward the bottom. That way it doesn't get stuck as much. That's the other disadvantage. That's why I've gone away from these. Is one, when you're pouring it in, the bees are going to get in there, and as you're pouring it in, the bees are riding on top of these little platforms, and you're going to, when you pour the syrup in, you're going to push some of those bees down in there, and you're going to drown a lot more bees. I drowned a lot more bees with one of these floating type, compartmented type hive top feeders than I do with the Miller feeders. That's why I've gone to the Miller feeders, because I don't drown as many bees. But again, your choice. All right. So next, so we're going to, again, I skipped to the feeder simply because I was only talking about the Boardman feeder. So next up is I've got a slatted rack. Optional piece of gear, but highly recommended. If you're on a budget, then you probably don't need this right off the bat. What a slatted rack does, it has, the better made ones have a shallower end on here, so it's less from the top and bottom, and that's hard to see on the video. There's a shallow depth side and a much deeper portion down here. You can probably see it much better now. There's a right way and a wrong way to put it. The cheaper ones have equal space on both sides. The better ones that are made, this is by Dadant, that's where I got this from if I remember right, are much better. They're more solid chunks of wood for the slats. What a slatted rack does is it encourages the queen to lay lower in the lowest brood chamber. It also has this solid piece of wood that goes toward the front of the front of the hive, and what that does, again, it helps any intruders that are coming in. It helps to keep them from getting direct access to the frames. So again, it gives the guard bees a little more chance to catch them. Plus, it creates more dark space up there, so it encourages the queen to lay and use those cells that she may or may not use toward the front of the bottom frames So it encourages her to come down and fill out all those frames with eggs and thereby brood. The other thing a slatted rack does, it creates dead space between the bottom board and the rest of the hive, so that it helps regulate the temperature inside the hive a little bit, because as cold air comes in, it has to mix with that dead air, which will mix out, even out the temperature, so it keeps it cooler during the summer and helps keep it a little bit warmer during the winter months, simply because you're dealing with that. The temperature's dealing with that dead air space inside there, so it's a decent little thing. So I love them. I've got them on all my hives. Again, there is a right way and a wrong way to put it on there. So again, you want it with the solid piece of the board toward the front, and then the deeper portion that's underneath. So I will put this on there. All right, I'm gonna reconfigure my hive. All right, and as I said before, I run, my personal choice is I run deep hive boxes or hive bodies for my brood chambers. And if there's any honey that's in these deeps, my theory is the bees get to keep them. So my theory is, if I know that I do any kind of mite treatments, anything that's in a deep frame, I don't have to worry about it. It's only for the honeybees. I don't have to worry about pesticide residue in the honey frames. Again, my personal stance is I don't use synthetic chemicals. I use natural organic chemicals or organic-based chemicals such as oxalic acid, which is naturally found in honey. But that's a different topic for a different video. So again, I run deeps for my brood chambers. Then I run mediums when I have a nectar flow, most of the spring nectar flow, if I'm going to extract honey that year. And then I take them off and store them in a freezer, chest freezer, during the winter months. Okay, and then again, I run a Miller feeder during the summer months and warm months. And then, as I said before, I run a ventilated inner cover to keep the honeybees from flying in. And then I use a telescoping top. As I was telling you before, there is a telescoping top which has a piece of wood all the way around, as you can see, vice a migratory top cover, outer cover it's also called, that only has pieces that come down on the front and back. And what this is for, there's different purposes for them. Most beekeepers will get a telescoping top, vice a migratory top. And the reason for the few times that you might want to consider getting a migratory top is if you offer your bees for a pollination services. It's another way of making money in honeybees, is you can offer to pollinate. You can take your hives, drop them off at some farmer's area for a fee, and then let your bees pollinate his crops with the understanding that he's not going to apply pesticides while you're pollinating, your bees are pollinating, and also you get to keep any honey that comes out of that resulting honey. But what a migratory top does, because it does not have the, on the telescoping top, you saw when I put it back over here, it extends about an inch to 2 inches on each side of the box. By having a migratory top, it's flush on the side, so you could stack more boxes of, in case of you're transporting your colonies for pollination services, you can move more boxes because they can be closer together. The other time you could use it, as I mentioned, there's another time you could use it, if you like to move your honeybees from one location to another frequently. For example, I know beekeepers that have land, or friends that have land in the mountain portions of North Carolina, so they can go over and get sourwood honey during that time of the year, and then they'll come back and get wildflower honey in another part of the state. So they try to catch things when they're in bloom and have specialized honey, because when you sell honey in my area, a pound of wildflower honey is about $12 per pound. If you use a specialized honey, sell a specialized honey, such as sourwood honey or Tupelo honey, you can get anywhere between $16 and $20 per pound. So there are people that move their colonies from one region to another to get specialized honey. And that would be a good reason to have a migratory top. All right, other gear that you can consider. Some people like to have a frame perch, and I'll show you what a frame perch does. Take this off. A frame perch allows you to put the frame perch on the outside of the hive, and as you're going through and you're inspecting the hive, the frames, you simply put them on the frame perch on the outside. Most frame perches typically hold about 3 to 5 frames. Most of them are shorter. On the shorter end, they'll typically hold about 3 frames. They're about $12 to $18, depending on who you get it from. To me, they're not worth the money. The reason I say that is some people love them, some people don't. The reason I say they're not worth the money, it only holds 3 to 5 frames, and if I spot my queen, but I want to continue on inspecting all the way down to the bottom of the hive bodies to catch small hive beetle larvae or anything else hanging out on the very bottom board, I've now got to, once I spot the queen, I've got to try to isolate her a little bit. That's what I like to do. So if you're on a frame perch, if you're using a frame perch, you either A, have to leave her in the box, her frame in the box, or if you put her on the outside, you run the risk of her falling off and you losing her. So what I do is I take a spare hive body and a spare telescoping top, and I put the telescoping top down. Doesn't matter whether you put it upside down or not. I usually put mine upside down, and I put my spare hive body in that, and then what that allows me to do, once I find my queen, I can simply put her in that spare box, and she has nowhere to go but down in the box. And I usually put a hive top or something on top of it as well to keep her isolated. But you don't have to do that, go to that extreme. But again, at bare minimum, I have a spare hive top and a spare hive body. I put the frames in there. Once I see the queen, I put her frame in there, and I make sure I do not have any frames near her. And what that does is, right before I put my queen back inside my box, I like to look for her to make sure I've got her still. So when I put her in that spare box that I have, and I'll put other frames in there as well, but once I see her, I won't have another frame anywhere near her in that box, and I won't have that frame anywhere close to the sidewall. So it minimizes the chance of her walking to the sidewall or down. 99% of the time, she's just going to stay on that frame, and then whenever I get ready to put her back inside the hive, I can quickly spot her again and put her back in. Again, personal preference, that's why I like doing it. The other thing is, again, if you bump your hive with these frame perches, if you rotate these a little bit, they can actually fall off. And you could have dirt and debris on your frame. So by using a spare hive body and a spare hive top, you can help keep dirt and debris out of it. If you don't, again, those are all optionals. So even a spare hive body, because if all else fails, you can simply take your frame of bees and put the frame on its edge like this and lean it against the box. And that will keep dirt out of it as well. But again, if you want to use a frame perch, that's okay. I personally don't. I use a spare hive body. All right, some other things you might want to know about. When you get a kit will come with an inner cover. Do not paint the inner cover. You do not have to. Remember, anything inside the hive, you're going to paint. You do not paint anything that's inside. You're only going to paint the things that are outside. The better made inner covers, if you use them, it's mostly used during the cold months, but you can use it during honey extraction time if you're going to do it. The better ones of these have this oval shaped hole in the center and a slot at the end. And again, you can either do slot up or slot down. I personally like to do slot down simply because it allows the bees easy access, get in and out without having to worry about getting trapped. Again, personal preference. But the purpose of this oval shaped hole versus the cheaper ones that are made are just rectangles is this oval shaped hole fits a bee escape. One of the ways to get bees out, again, I just use a bee brush, so I don't even use the bee escape. But again, some people like to use that little bee escape to put this down like this. They'll put all the honey supers on top of it when they're getting ready to extract their honey in preparations for extracting the honey. They'll simply place this down, inner cover down on top of the brood chambers, put a bee escape device on that little oval hole, and they'll put the honey supers down. The bees go down the bee escape out of the honey supers for the night when they're getting ready to go back into brood chambers and rest for the night, and they can't figure out how to get back up to the honey. So it's a slow process. Most people don't use it. They use it either the fume board or, again, a bee brush is what I use. Again, I don't even use a fume board. I've got one. I don't use it. So again, typically comes with a new kit. I don't use it. So I've never used one. I've been beekeeping for years. All right. Next thing that you may consider is a queen excluder. Again, I've got a video that says what are queen excluders, but I actually talk about in that video how to use them as well. Again, you can watch that video on how to use it. Basically, queen excluder comes in three different versions. Either it comes with, most of them are either some kind of metal grating. Again, as its name implies, it keeps a queen from going from one side of the barrier to the other. For example, it's typically used to keep the queen in the lower chamber and keep from going up into the honey supers. Or there are other cases like the Demaree method or something like that where for swarm prevention you can also use it instead of keeping the queen from going up into the honey, laying eggs in the honey supers. You can use it for swarm prevention as well using the Demaree method. So it comes either a metal grating or a metal grating with a wooden bound outside like this one is, or the third version is a plastic version, and again it has these little plastic slots in it, again to exclude queen. The advantage to a plastic version queen excluder though is if you are collecting propolis to make tinctures or any other products of the hive that use propolis, if you buy one of these plastic queen excluders, you can put it on the top of the hive and use it as a propolis trap. And what to do, and then what you do is you prop up the lid a little bit so it allows sunlight in it, and bees hate that. So they'll come in and they'll put propolis in all these little slots and fill that up for you. And then you can take this queen excluder, plastic queen excluder, put it in a freezer, and much like an old ice cube tray, you can simply, once it freezes, you can simply bend it, pop those pieces, biticles of hardened propolis out. Now you got clean propolis to use in your tinctures or whatever else you're going to make out of them, your deodorants or whatever you're going to make out of them. So again, plastic queen excluder, again, I've never used one, but again, they're handy to have. I've got several in case I ever need to do swarm prevention for using the Demaree method as I was telling you about. I've got some. So again, they're kind of handy to have a couple on hand. The other thing that you do want to get, and they're not part of a kit, is what we call an emery shim. If I get the name, yeah, I-M-I-R-I-E, shim. So all it is a 3/4 by 3/4 inch piece of wood, and they have a slot on one end. You're going to want a couple of these, and the reason for that is if you apply certain pesticides such as Apiguard, it's a tinfoil tray with the pesticide in the tray. You peel it back, and then it's I forget the treatment. I think it's like 30, 45 days. Anyway, you'll need extra space. You're going to put that tinfoil tray on top of the frames, and then there needs to be bee space around it. So by having an emery shim, you can put an emery shim on top of your brood chamber, put your Apiguard on top, and now the bees have plenty of room to move around. The reason I say you want 2 emery shims, and they're only about $5 for these things, they're cheap, is a good method of introducing a queen is by using 2 emery shims. When you introduce a queen, there's 2 different ways of doing it. You can either take the queen cage and put it down between 2 frames and pin it between 2 frames. Again, there'll be a separate video. I don't have one yet on how to do it. But again, if you watch one of my videos, I talk about it. Where basically you take your queen cage and pin her in between that with the candy portion of the queen cage pointing up, facing up. and that's the traditional method. My local state apiary inspector actually taught me a trick many years ago. Nancy Rupert, love her to death, taught me to use 2 emery shims. And again, I've got I'll try to remember to put some still photos of both these techniques in here. But you simply use 2 emery shims, and instead of now taking your queen cage, instead of pinning her in between 2 frames, I can simply take the 2 emery shims and I can lay that queen cage flat on top of the frames, and now the bees can get access to her. It's a really good, easy way to introduce a queen. By pinching her in between 2 frames, you run the risk of that queen cage potentially falling, but by placing it on top and using 2 emery shims, it eliminates that whole threat. And then also you can quickly see if they're rejecting her easier. All right, some other things you might need in your first year. So again, I do highly encourage you to get 2 emery shims. And then the other thing I highly encourage you to get is a quilt box. You can either buy it or make it. A quilt box is used in the winter months. It provides insulation. So all it is a box, a high body, so easy made if you do it yourself. You simply using either a deep or medium or shallow, whatever you have, and you put these little, if you got a table saw, you make these little up to anywhere between an 1/8 to 3/8 inch little shims, and then you get some 1/8 inch mesh, wire mesh, and you put it on the bottom, and then you have a little spacer bar, just scrap wood. It goes across there to side to help support your screen, and you simply staple everything to it. And then from there, you buy burlap from your local hobby store, and then from there, you simply fill it full of pine shavings or cedar shavings, preferably pine shavings though. And what that does, when you put it on top of in the winter months, I would have my deep hive body, and then my second deep hive body, which is now filled full of honey for the winter, that the bees have filled up with the honey. They get to keep that. Then for my preparations, I put 2 candy boards on top of that. I'll show you what that is here in a second. And then I put my quilt box on top of it. So when you use a quilt box, it does, like I said, a couple things. 1, it provides insulation. 2, those pine shavings help absorb any excess moisture that's coming up from the brood chamber. Also, your candy boards are also helping absorb that moisture, excess moisture. And then you put your telescoping top on top of that, and you're set for the winter. Let's see. One of the other things I want to talk about too, on your telescoping top is this. I know this is this is a migratory top, but it works the same concept. Oh, yeah, I've got it. On your telescoping top, again, moisture is a major problem in the wintertime because as the moisture goes up, it hits the top of the telescoping top or migratory top, and it can drip back down. If you don't have anything like the quilt box or a candy board to catch that, that cold water can drip back down on the bees and kill them by hypothermia. So you want to get ventilation going and getting that moisture out of the hive so it goes out. A good trick to that is to take a craft stick. You can buy a box for like $3, $4 from your hobby store, and simply snap it in 2, and then you take a stapler, one of these little staple guns. You take your little staple gun, you break your craft stick in half, and on the short axis of your telescoping top or your migratory top, you break this in half, and you simply staple these down. What that does, it gives you just a tiny space for that moist air to go up and over, much like a chimney effect of a chimney. That moist air is going to go up and out, and this craft stick will provide just enough space for that moisture to get out, but not enough space that the bees can come in. So again, it's a great little trick a beekeeper taught me years ago. And the reason you want to do it on the ends, the short ends, vice on the long ends, is if you have one of these little ventilated inner covers, those little ventilated inner covers have a raised portion and a sunken portion on the sides. So if you did it on the sides, it doesn't do you any good. But it's on the top, on the short ends, it'll hit this taller bar. So again, some really neat trick to do. Okay, back to the quilt board too. The other nice thing about the quilt box, if you have a quilt box, you do not, that's another reason you do not need an inner cover. Remember, an inner cover is mostly used during cold months. So if you're using a quilt box, which I highly encourage you to get, they're not expensive. If you buy them, they're like 12, 15 bucks. They're not that expensive, maybe 20. They're not that expensive. Or you make your own. Again, they provide insulation, and they're great. They're great things to have, and it replaces that inner cover. All right, so moving on. I'm almost done. Talk about that. Talk about feeders. Back to the feeders too. The advantage to a hive top feeder is they'll hold about 2 to 2.5 gallons of syrup. That's another reason I like them as opposed to a division board feeder. Division board feeders hold between 1 and 2 gallons. Talked about the inner covers, talked about the entrance reducers, talked about the queen excluder, candy board, almost done. All right, a candy board is a cheap insurance policy against starvation. This is a facsimile of one. I've got a video on how to make the candy for the candy board. So all it is a box of some sort, and it has 1/2-inch mesh screening on it. And again, I'll have still photos that show this as well. And then I put cleats, these little cleats, mine are 3/8 inch roughly, basically the thickness of a piece of cardboard and some box paper and just a little bit of extra space, not a whole lot. Again, watch my video on how to make candy boards, and it will explain all that. But all it is filled with white granulated sugar, and it's all you do is mix it with just a little bit of water. It's 3 cups of water per 16 pounds of sugar, and you can add up to a tablespoon, if I remember right, of white vinegar as a mold preventative. Again, most of the time I don't even use that. The beauty to a candy board, again, I put 2 on every hive beginning 1st of December or anywhere between end of November to mid-December. I'm in North Carolina, and that's in the Piedmont region of the North Carolina. So I'll put them on anywhere between the end of November to mid-December, and I put 2 of these on every hive. And the reason for that is it's a cheap insurance against starvation. The #1 killer of honeybees for new beekeepers is starvation. So even for experienced beekeepers, if you're not careful, you could lose your colonies from starvation. Ask me how I know that. I had an experiment go wrong. I was making them forage a little bit more. I got tired of feeding them, foraging, and I was making them go out and forage. Well, I let it go too far, and they starved to death, some of my colonies. So learn from my mistakes. Cheap insurance policy, put 2 candy boards. Now, the also advantage of the candy boards is one, if you don't have the equipment to make them, simply go to your local bee store, get the first one yourself, and then use my videos to show you how to make them, the candy board, the candy fort, and then refill them. Again, cheap insurance against starvation. So that's pretty much my video for equipment that you need. As I talk to it, recapping quickly, you want some books to get educated? Go see your local chapter as well. Join your local chapter, ask for a mentor. Read the books. Again, I recommend Hiving a Honeybee first, and then the next step down, if you don't have as much money, Beekeeping for Dummies. And then thirdly is First Lessons in Beekeeping by Keith Delaplane. The next thing I talk about, you have to have some kind of protective gear, such as at a bare minimum, you want to have a veil, preferably a ventilated jacket with or without pants, or a full bee suit. I wear a full bee suit. I've got the jacket in case I'm doing something minor. When you get the suit, remember you're going to get it 1 to 2 sizes larger than what you typically do it. buy them, check them at your local bee stores, and try them on for size there. Next thing you want is some kind of gloves. Again, personal preference. Some people don't wear gloves at all. Some people like to wear the nitrile gloves because they can feel a little bit more, or I personally use the full gloves because inevitably I'm going to get stung. Getting stung is not that big a deal. Yeah, it sucks. It stings every time, but first time I swelled up about 4 inches. It was pretty big. It's what we call a large local reaction. My hands swell up pretty good. You get used to it after a while, and your body becomes acclimated. A couple years ago, I got stung twice in the belly, and an hour later, you couldn't tell where I stung. So you get used to it. The other thing I didn't mention in the video is you want to consider getting an epinephrine pen from your local doctor. It's handy to have, in case you get stung, you have a reaction to it. If you take the American Red Cross's course on how to use an EpiPen, it's a great course. If you're in the Master Beekeeper program, it counts as a subspecialty as well. It's a half-hour course, not a big deal. But it's good to have one of those epinephrine pens at your house in case you get stung and get issues. Then we talked about, so you need protective gear. You want a smoker. Get the smoker with the protective handguard. Talked about the veil at a minimum. Then we want some kind of hive tools. Watch my hive tool video. Tells you how to use them. Watch my smoker video. Shows you how to light the smoker and keep it lit. And what smoker fuel to use. You want to use anything that's like pine straw, wood, anything that does not have chemicals in it. Do not use petroleum-based products. Do not use anything that's dried poisonous plant, like poison ivy or anything like that. You can use dried leaves. Do not use anything that's poison, because once it's dry, it can release the oils again. Once you start burning it, don't do that. Again, watch my my smoker video, how to use a smoker. It'll explain that pretty well, how to use it and how to light it and how to keep it going. It's really simple, especially if you use pine straw. The next thing we'll talk about is the component parts. Starting off with, you want some kind of hive stand. Preferably you get one that either cinder blocks or something, you get it up a little bit higher so it keeps if you have a predator such as a skunk or raccoon coming up, it causes them to raise up a little higher. It also keeps the grass and weeds out of the front of the hive, as well as gives them moisture. The next thing considered optional, again, getting one of the slope landing boards, hive stands, and then your choice of either screen bottom board or a solid bottom board, and then a slatted rack, recommended, optional, and then your choice of either going all medium frames or all deep frames, or a combination in my case. So I run deeps for the brood chambers and mediums for the supers. And then we talked about some kind of feeding system, whether it be a Boardman feeder, and I told you the pros and cons of that. Again, I don't use them unless I got nosema or where I want to introduce water at the front. Or using a division board feeder. Again, I don't use it. Some people love them. Or using a Miller Tide top feeder, which is my favorite. Remember, you got to put it on with the screen toward the front. And remember, when you put your hive stands, you want to level out the hive stand, and then you want to elevate the back of the hive slightly. Again, a little 1-inch piece of wood, which is actually 3/4 inch tall, gives you that slope toward the front to keep the water out. And then we talked about some of the other various optional things you can talk about, such as that you might consider getting, such as a queen excluder. If you get the plastic, it doubles as a propose strap. Definitely do get a Emery shims, 2 of them. And then lastly, I'll briefly talk about it here because I talk about it during my bee schools, is how to get the bees. So obviously you've got all the equipment now, is how to get the bees. So there's 3 ways of getting bees. You can either buy a packaged bees. It's going to come in one of these type of containers. Either the traditional is one of these little wooden boxes with screen, wire mesh screen, or the newer ones are coming with these plastic boxes. And it's 3-pound packages of bees. So either you can order it from your local bee supplier and then pick it up whenever they go to Georgia and get it, or Florida, wherever they go, but most of them go to Georgia, and they'll bring back a bunch of these things. Regardless, it comes with 3 pounds of bees, or you can order it directly from the supplier from Georgia or from Florida, and they'll mail it to you to the post office, and your postmaster will let you know quickly come and get your bees when they're ready to pick up. So it comes with 3 pounds of bees. That's 12,500 workers and 1 queen. It comes with, I just put a screw on this, but it comes with a little thin piece of Luan plywood. You pop that off. It's just stapled on. I just got it on here for demonstration. I got it on with screws so I don't lose it. And then it comes with a can of syrup for the bees. And then it has, it'll have your queen in her little cage. The disadvantage to a package bees is this most likely is not their queen. So the disadvantage is that you run the risk when you buy package bees. The advantage is it's cheaper. These in North Carolina, these are about $130 to $140 for a package bees. Disadvantage is because it's not their queen, they may reject her and kill her. Or B, when you put it in your hive, they may just leave town. They call it absconding. One of my students last year went in with his uncle. All right, I'm back. My battery died. Murphy's on me today. All right, so last thing I was talking about was 3 ways of getting bees, and then I'm done. If you can get a package bees, 3 pound package bees. Remember, when you buy package bees, it's 3 pounds. Comes with 1 queen that's not their queen most of the time, and it's 12,500 bees, workers, no drones. The queen will make her own. The disadvantage to a package bees is they can abscond. If they don't like their new home, they can leave. The other disadvantage is it's not their queen most of the time. They can reject the queen and kill her when you install it. These are about $130 to $140 in North Carolina. Last time I looked, I told you the story of if my battery held up. One of my students last year, him and his uncle bought 3 of those things and took them home, installed them. I told them how to install them. They installed them properly. Came out a week later, and one of them had gone, totally left town. We call that absconding. So there's some pros and cons to it. Pro is it's cheaper. There is some risk with doing it. The next type of bees you can get is you can buy a nucleus colony, or a nuke. It is typically 5 frames. And they'll run, in North Carolina here, they'll run about $180 to $200, depending on who you buy it from. But most of them are running about $180 for a nucleus colony. And then you have to provide your own box to transport them back unless you buy the box from the supplier. It's typically 5 frames, 1 frame of pollen and 1 frame of honey, or a combination frame of pollen and honey. And then the rest of the frames, either 3 or 4, are full of bees. The advantage to a nucleus colony, and this is what I recommend that you get, and we always recommend that you start off, a new beekeeper starts off with at least 2 colonies, preferably 2, so that when you're inspecting, if you see something wrong, you can quickly figure it out from the other one. If you don't have a mentor that help you out, you can quickly look at the other colony and compare the 2, or you can take parts from one colony and give it to the other minus the queen. So the nucleus colony is your second option, and it's your best option, even though it's more expensive. The advantage is it's a fully functional colony. It's their queen, and it has bees of all stages. It has an egg, it has eggs, it has larvae, it has pupae, it has adult bees, it has drones. So it is a fully functional colony, just only 4 to 5 frames. Excuse me, 3 to 4 frames of bees, and then 1 to 2 frames of pollen and honey. The third way of getting bees is to buy an existing full colony from somebody. It's very expensive. Typically, they'll run anywhere from between $300 to $400 if you can get them at all. And you get them that way. It's rare you can get a full colony unless somebody's just selling out. So there's 3 ways of getting the bees: package bees, nucleus colony, or a full colony. So there you go. So I know this is an extremely long video. For those of you who stuck around, I appreciate your patience, and hopefully you learned a lot. Be sure to watch my other videos. Again, I don't receive a commission for these. I don't make any money off these videos. I do this as just my hobby of giving back to the community. Again, I'm a master beekeeper. It's just my way of teaching. It's a natural extension of my teaching and giving back to the beekeeping community. So thank you for watching, and have a great day.